tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, good evening, everyone. It's nice to see people tuning in. Welcome to another Wednesday evening with the Clear Mountain Monastery community. We're on YouTube and Facebook, and it's great to see people. It's just a random Wednesday in 2022, and we're here to talk about the hindrances, not such a sexy or exciting topic, but one which is really quite important on the path, essential. And we'll be looking at that in the context of what's called the gradual training, which is found in the Maha Asapura Sutta. That's Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 39. And this is getting close to the end. We've had probably 8 or so teachings similar to this on the steps which precede this one. And again, the Buddha never says that they're absolutely sequential. It's not like you purify your bodily conduct before you start thinking about your speech. Yeah, you start refraining from killing at the same time as you refrain from lying. It's not like stepwise, like you take one foot to the next step, remove the previous foot from that previous step, and then go to the next one. Many of these different steps come in tandem. So, as I mentioned, the subject for tonight's aspect of the gradual teaching are abandoning the 5 hindrances, just to give that some context of at what stage in this succession this comes about. So in the sutta, we have the Buddha talking in terms of trainings. So in terms of affirmations, almost, bhikkhus, you should train thus. And then in first person, I will be one who has a sense of conscience and fear of wrongdoing, Hiri Otappa. That's where this whole progression begins. Then one trains, I will be one who is pure in bodily conduct. I'll be one who's pure in verbal conduct, in mental conduct. I'll be one who purifies my livelihood. I'll be one who is restrained with regards to the senses, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And body, using these things in an intelligent way, in a restrained way, so as not to give rise to unwholesome mind states. The next step, which is spoken of in this discourse and elsewhere, is knowing moderation in eating. After that, we have the training, we will be ones who are devoted to wakefulness. And we also have the training, we will be ones who are possessed of mindfulness and clear comprehension. And at this point, that's when we come to abandoning the hindrances before the next step being developing the 4 jhanas. So that's a bit of an overview, and I'll just actually read, reading people's comments. I'll read what the sutta says, because that gives us some context. So, what more is to be done after we've been doing all these previous steps? What more is to be done? Here, bhikkhus, and here you can just replace that with practitioners. A practitioner resorts to a secluded resting place. The forest, the root of a tree, a mountain, a ravine, a hillside cave, a charnel ground, a jungle thicket, an open space, or a heap of straw. So this is, we've talked about these before, these pericopes, which is a stock phrase. So this list of 9 different secluded places, this comes up again and again and again throughout the discourses. And what you'll notice about this list here is that they're all places outside. So we've got forest, the root of a tree, a mountain, a ravine, a hillside cave, charnel ground, a jungle thicket, an open space, or a straw mat, a pile of straw. There are other discourses and other stock phrases where the Buddha allows and says a practitioner resorts to the foot of a tree or an empty hut. So in this particular phrasing, the Buddha doesn't list that, but really it's about practicality. So many people, probably most people who are listening to this, live in a city, or certainly you live close enough to some level of society that you can get internet access. But yeah, not everybody has access to a hillside cave every evening that they come home from work. You can't automatically just, find your jungle thicket, or, the forest isn't necessarily, within a block's walk from your house. And even if it was, that might not necessarily be a safe place. So the Buddha was a practical person. This list of places isn't meant to be exclusive or exhaustive. And yeah, sitting on a clump of straw, the last one of these, you can sit on your meditation cushion. For a modern person, the list might go something like: the practitioner resorts to a relatively secluded and relatively quiet place, to their bedroom, or to the living room, or to some other room of their house, But I think it's important to look at a couple things which do appear as implicit suggestions in this list. If you can, if it is a possibility, nature is very calming. There's one monk in our tradition, Ajahn, who lives in a very secluded monastery on the border between Burma and Thailand, a monastery called Pujam Kam. It's not even a full monastery, it's just a hermitage. But he will live there and many other monks in our tradition. I've lived there for, I think the most I lived there was for a month at a time. But living there for, significant periods of time, where you're living in a very simple hut, if even a hut at all, you might be living in living on a bamboo platform with a tarp covering. And you look in every direction, 365 degrees, and it's just nature. And you don't see straight lines. You don't see vertical, horizontal lines like we're totally surrounded by. I mean, especially this, setting I've got here tonight. I mean, oh my gosh, this is it's like a tic-tac-toe board up in here. But he said that when you don't see these, it actually becomes a bit jarring. If you see all these natural lines and natural colors, if you're living in a forest, it's easy to go to a foot of a tree. The Buddha did recommend wilderness dwelling for monks and for other practitioners when you're able. When you're living around this very natural environment, the eyes can relax. And Ajahn Siripani was saying that it's actually jarring, and things become sharp. Edges are sharp, colors are a bit too bright when you're used to just matted colors of leaves and the ground and the sky. So yeah, this is a plug for nature. If you can get outside, then it's a good place to go. But it's also an allowance for doing what you can. Yeah. If what you've got is your living room or your bedroom, then that's great. You do want to find a place that's relatively quiet and relatively undisturbed. If you've got people who are, you never know who might come and disturb your meditation, that, as probably all of you know, that can be quite disturbing. And but do what you can with the space you've got. If possible, it is useful to set aside a specific area which is only designated for meditation. Then the mind will start associating that location in your house, whether it's a part of your room, just one corner of your room that you've got your meditation mat, your meditation cushion, and that's all you do there. You don't sleep there, you don't play Angry Birds there, you don't play Words with Friends there. All you do is meditate. Then when you get near that area, or when you sit down, the mind will gather more quickly because it's not looking for something else to do, because it's used to doing what it does there, which is meditate. This is something called choice architecture. You want to set up your house in a way which supports your practice. And here we're talking about formal practice. So the next part, after someone has resorted to a suitable place to meditate, is abandoning the hindrances proper. So the Buddha says, on returning from their alms round after their meal, they sit down, having folded their legs crosswise, setting their body erect and establishing mindfulness before them. And so this is another stock phrase. What's important here is not necessarily that you've eaten before you sit to meditate. That's just a bit of a particularity with regards to a monastic's life. In Thailand, when you're eating one meal a day, the Buddha ate one meal a day for the most part. And that one meal can be very early. People who are new to the concept of one meal a day might be surprised at how early monks eat that one meal a day. In a Theravada Buddhist country, you go out for alms round, perhaps leaving the monastery at 6 a.m., 6:30, just as soon as it's dawn. And yeah, you go out for alms round from maybe 6:30 to 7:30 or 8. You're back at the monastery and start eating the meal by 8:15 or 8:30. When the Buddha says here, after returning from your alms round, having had your meal, that's just because for most people, most monastics, the majority of their day is after that meal. You have your meal, you're done with by 9 o'clock, 9:30, then that's when a bulk of your meditation is happening. That said, of course, we meditate before we eat as well. So one folds their legs crosswise. And again, if you can do this, then that's great. But the next point is what's more important, is that setting your body erect. So if you're in a chair, it's not that big a deal. Our culture, weren't really raised sitting on the ground, so more used to sitting in chairs. So, but whatever you're doing, whether you're sitting on a mat or you're sitting on a cushion without a mat, or vice versa, or you're in a chair, whatever it is, you want to be upright, because that sets the mind in a place that's similarly upright. And you establish mindfulness before you. Some people translate this as you establish mindfulness at the tip of the nose, but that's not necessarily, not necessary for every meditation object. And then here the Buddha describes the 5 hindrances. So abandoning covetousness, this is abhijja, also translated as greed, or the mind which goes towards things. Abandoning covetousness for the world, they abide with a mind free from covetousness, and they purify their mind from covetousness. So when the Buddha says the world here, there's a sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya where he defines that. There's a monk who comes to the Buddha and says, the world, what do you mean when you say the world, Buddha? And the Buddha responds, the I is the world. Forms, that is what we see with the eye, that's the world. The contact between the two, or consciousness and the contact between those three, that's the world. The ear and sounds plus ear consciousness, that's the world. Smells, or the nose plus smells plus mind, smell consciousness, nose consciousness, that's the world. The tongue plus tastes plus tongue consciousness, that's the world. The body plus touches plus bodily consciousness, that's the world. The mind plus thoughts plus mind consciousness, that's the world. So that's the scope that the Buddha is talking about. You abandon greed or covetousness for all these things. And yeah, I would, before going into the other hindrances, I'll just jump forward. This is not so much a spoiler, but it is in the next paragraph down. But the Buddha gives 5 similes, which he doesn't explicitly say, okay, this simile is for this hindrance, but he does list 5 similes, and there are 5 hindrances. So many teachers will suggest that there's a correlation between each successive simile and the hindrance. So, and again, with all teachings in a Buddhist context, you really want to be taking them internally. So these are fun things to memorize. If you like study, these are great discourses to be thinking about. But what's most important is to actually be bringing them into your life, into your meditation specifically, but also anywhere, anytime that you see the mind jumping towards something, this over likingness or this covetousness. You want to address that and purify the mind, as it said. So the first of these similes is, suppose a man were to take a loan and undertake business, and his business was to succeed, so that he could repay all the money of the old loan, and there would remain enough extra to maintain a wife. Then, on considering this, he would be glad and full of joy. So what that is a description, a simile for what it's like to abandon the hindrances. And here we'll think about it specifically in terms of relating abhijja or covetousness with being in debt. So anybody who's ever been in debt, anybody who's ever had credit card debt, or hopefully you haven't been in debt to the mafia or any other such organized crime syndicate. I've never been in debt. I ordained early enough in life that I didn't even have credit card debt. But yeah, just being even indebted to someone, being indebted to someone on, a gifting basis or a service basis. Yeah, it kind of, it weighs on you, this, when you feel like you owe somebody something, or when you really do owe someone or something, a bank, money. And the higher the value the thing that you owe is, then the more heavy it will weigh on your mind. And that's perhaps similar with as we practice and meditate, and you see the pitfalls and the drawbacks of the greedy mind. Hopefully we are reining the mind in from more coarse, more gross sense impingement. We're no longer chasing after things which are vulgar in any kind of way, because those things have even more of a comic debt imprint on the mind. So when we come to meditate, if you've been fantasizing about lusting after beautiful men and beautiful women and all the tasty McDonald's or delicious vegan stuff you're going to be eating, well, yeah, there's a gradation. That's the point. And the more you lust, then the more that will have an imprint on your mind when you come to meditate. So the more we can let go of the lusting mind, the covetous mind, the greedy mind, the wanting mind, then the less debt we'll have when we come to sit to meditate. So the second hindrance is ill will, vyapada. And the Buddha says, abandoning ill will and hatred, dosa, he abides with a mind free from ill will. Compassionate for the welfare of living beings, they purify their mind from ill will and hatred. And the next simile, suppose a man were afflicted, suffering, and gravely ill, and their food would not agree with them, and their body had no strength. But later they would recover from the affliction, and their food would agree with them, and their body would regain strength. Then, on considering this, they would be glad and full of joy. So you'll notice that refrain at the end. On noticing this, on realizing this, then they would be glad and full of joy. You see that at the end of all of these similes. Anytime you abandon these hindrances, there's a sense of gladness and joy. But here with ill will is a catch-all term for the mind which pushes away, the mind which is especially, angry towards people, but on a more subtle level, it does also manifest in our aversiveness and aversion towards things when we're constantly bumping up against things in our environment, situations in our life. And the Buddha equates this to a sickness. So it's like, hopefully it's not the case, but statistically it might be so that maybe some of you have had Omicron. Maybe some of you have had COVID, and that is equivalent to the mind which is filled with hatred. The seething mind is a mind which is, it's sick, it's ill, and you want to come to a state of health. You want to quarantine to some extent. If you're seething, then of course you want to stay away from people. But even in formal sitting practice, you want to get some space from the angry mind, the angry thoughts, and don't feed it anymore. Don't subject yourself to further sickness and further disease, further viruses of the unwholesome and angry aversive thoughts that you have. But when you're just as, hopefully people don't have long COVID, so you know what it's like to actually get better from your illness, but that's what it's like to when you freed your mind from anger. And unfortunately, we might have some time a bit later, but there are specific meditation techniques, there's specific life techniques and ways of turning the mind to abandon each of these 5 hindrances. Suffice to say, the Buddha singles out compassion. So rather than thinking about wanting to hurt other people, you replace those thoughts with compassionate thoughts. May they be well, to the extent that you can. That's just one antidote. There are many good books on antidotes for anger, antidotes for ill will in meditation. You really have to experiment. But I think what's really a fundamental step is just to realize that you don't want these. These aren't friendly voices that you want to be associating with. The next hindrance is sloth and torpor, tina mida. And the Buddha says, abandoning sloth and torpor, they abide free from sloth and torpor, percipient of light, aloka sanya, mindful and fully aware, sato sampajanya. They purify their mind from sloth and torpor. In the simile, suppose a man were imprisoned in a prison house, but later they would be released from prison, safe and secure, with no loss to their property. Then, on considering this, they would be glad and full of joy. So, sloth and torpor is equated here to, being imprisoned, and that's how I've experienced that. Is that with the other hindrances, which there is a very clear mind-body connection between all of the hindrances. Yeah. So when your body is tense, when you have adrenaline running through your body because you're angry or you've been challenged, that tenseness, there's a correlation between mental anger and the physical manifestation of this. Similar with greed, similar with the fourth and fifth hindrances of restlessness and worry and doubt. But with sloth and torpor, especially if sloth and torpor is related to a sense of having eaten too much, which is one of the causes for sloth and torpor, which the Buddha singles out, that can last a bit longer than these other. You've got food weighing you down from the inside, with the adrenaline of anger. If you learn how to relax the body, relax the face, relax the shoulders, relax the hands, relax the eyes, relax the mouth, you can help the body work through its anger. But with food and the torpor which comes from that can last a bit longer. So it's almost like a prison sentence if you've eaten too much. And again, with all of these, there's a gradual paths to abandoning the hindrances, and there are immediate ways to abandon the hindrances if you know how to shift the mind. So yeah, don't eat too much before the meal. And if you are experiencing sloth and torpor, the Buddha singles out this perception of light, and that has many different degrees. One of them, if you're meditating, is just opening your eyes. There's nothing sacred about having your eyes closed while you meditate. In fact, that pericope, that stock phrase, which the Buddha uses so often, where he says, setting their body erect, you establish mindfulness before you with your legs crossed. It doesn't say close the eyes. So close your eyes when you want to and when it's useful, and don't when it's not. So the fourth hindrance is uddhacca kukucca, or restlessness and remorse. The Buddha says, abandoning restlessness and remorse, one abides unagitated with a mind inwardly peaceful, and they purify their mind from restlessness and remorse. And the simile, suppose a man were a slave, not self-dependent, but dependent on others, unable to go where they want. But later on, they would be released from slavery, self-dependent, independent of others, a freed man able to go where they want. And on considering this, they will be glad and full of joy. So the Buddha equating the mind, which is constantly running around, to being enslaved. People might remember the simile of the 6 animals, where the Buddha says it's like you've got a jackal, and you've got a bird, and you've got a snake, and you've got a dog, and you've got a monkey, and you've got a crocodile. And it's as if someone bound them together. And this is the Buddha's, this is a simile for sense restraint. But it has some bearing here. It's that when the mind is just doesn't know how to relax. Mind doesn't know how to be at peace, to shift into a mode that's not obsessed with its own proliferations. Then it's like you're slave, just like these animals, or worse, like a human, as the Buddha speaks of here. And these are they're phrased in very succinct manners, but slavery is a very ugly thing, and the implications behind these similes, these metaphors, are quite dire and really worthy of consideration. Just as you would never want to be enslaved, and you would never want anybody to be enslaved in any way. Similarly, why would we want to be a slave to our own restlessness? Or why would we want anybody else to be a slave to our own restlessness? And you realize, as you practice deeper and deeper layers of freedom from restlessness and remorse. And the final hindrance is doubt, or vicikiccha. So the Buddha says, abandoning doubt, they abide, having gone beyond doubt, unperplexed about wholesome mental states. They purify their mind from doubt. And the simile, suppose a man with wealth and property were to enter a road across a desert, but later on they would cross over the desert, safe and secure, with no loss to their property. Then on considering this, they would be glad and full of joy. So yeah, doubt can be like going on a journey in someplace. It's like going somewhere without Google Maps, or without MapQuest, or whatever people use these days. You're just, or if, when you finally get to your destination, then, even if you were lost, then you're happy that you made it. And similarly with doubt, there is a way to flip the mind into freedom from doubt. And that's safety, that's security. And that's a brief and fast outline of these 5 hindrances, the similes for the 5 hindrances. And we didn't really go so much into different techniques for abandoning them, which is too bad. We'll have to probably have a whole series, hopefully Tan Nisabo and or myself, on techniques for abandoning each of the 5 hindrances, and maybe have a video for each one of those. But in the meantime, now it's time for questions. So people can feel free to put your questions in the chat, and whether it's about the 5 hindrances, or what they're like, how you experience them, or how you might abandon them. I'd love to see people's thoughts. So, all right, first question. All right, hello, gents. Ajahn, I know you stated that these steps are not progressive, but do you see Hiri and Otappa, or that's conscience and fear of wrongdoing, one translation, as the start, opening to all the other steps? Thank you. So, a good question. I think that it can be a very good first step. And again, not like a first step that you take, when you first encounter Buddhist teachings, you're like, okay, I realize that Hiri and Otappa, having a wholesome sense, a healthy sense of shame about doing, things which are, inappropriate. Like when you first realize that, say you're 18 or 36 or 54, you first come across this concept, and that's when you take that first step. I don't mean it so much like that, but as a working first step. So I think this might be why the Buddha put that in where he did, in this gradual progression, because in one sense it does precede the precepts to some extent. You keep the precept, the 5 precepts of not killing, not stealing, not having illicit or sexual misconduct, not lying, not taking intoxicants, because you see the harm in that. You have this, you have a growing sense of healthy distance between self-respect and respect for others. And that self-respect and respect for others can be what makes you think, oh, maybe I shouldn't steal, maybe I shouldn't lie. But it can also be a first step into this mental realm of purification. Like, actually, the sense of hearing Otappa, the sense of wanting to distance myself from ugly mental states. So I start seeing jealousy. God, it's ugly. I don't want to be jealous. That is a mental manifestation of Hiri and Otappa, and that precedes the mind that then turns to abandoning jealousy, to abandoning these different things. So yeah, I think you can see it like that. Of course, at a certain phase, you don't actively think like, oh yeah, I don't want to steal, or I don't want to lie, or I don't want to be thinking, um, yeah, mean thoughts about this person. It's like you internalize the Hiri and Otappa. Yeah. So maybe that's a progression you can think of as well, is um, a conscious and intentional and very deliberate turning of the mind towards wholesome drawing back, versus like an internalized hearing otapa, which comes as you practice. You've formally taken the precepts so many times, and you've just repeatedly told yourself, "Oh yeah, being mean, Kovilo, it's dumb. You don't like it, and other people don't like it." So, and you've told yourself, and you've seen that enough that it becomes internal. So you no longer need to take that, first, uh, take those first mental gymnastic steps of saying, "Oh yeah, jealousy is ugly for this and that and this other reason, and here's why I don't want to do it, and here's why it's bad for others." You don't need to be um, so explicit as you internalize these things. But really good question, Jens, and it's beautiful, and it really does become your sense of what's wholesome and unwholesome becomes more refined as you walk the path, and the mind gets more still and bright. Oops, actually, we had a question here. So, can you speak about the style of mindfulness that is developed when one doesn't practice in ideal conditions, like quiet or simple places? What are the advantages and disadvantages? Um, yeah, a very good question. The type of mindfulness which we practice in non-ideal situations. Um, in one sense, it's mindfulness is the same. So, uh, sati, the mind which is able to observe and to step back and to remember um, what's wholesome and what's unwholesome, that's the same quality of mind, whether you're sitting meditation in the middle of a forest with nobody around, or when you're in a board meeting and other people are speaking in challenging ways, or if you're in a class and you're teaching and the students are being disruptive. The mind which is able to step back and be aware and to know this is the path of the wholesome, this is the path of the unwholesome. It's the same mind, but the techniques can be a bit different. I mean, when you're able to find a place that's quiet, then the mind is able to, usually for most people, which is why the Buddha recommends this, it's able to settle more. So if you wanted to see this broad difference between samatha and vipassana practice, the samatha, which is tranquility or settling, the collectedness of mind, that's easier to do, when the snow globe isn't getting shaken up. It's easier to settle when you don't have people yelling at you all the time. Um, and so there are certain practices which are samatha practices, having a particular mantra or becoming more and more subtle with the breath and seeing more and more aspects of the interoception, your internal felt sense of the body. But vipassana practices, or even you could think of it, dzogchen practices, or practices which are able to really just step back, which you can do at any time, even if you're not in an ideal quiet situation. You want to be practicing that ability as well. And I think a good initial step in that direction is just, it is possible, to have a flip, to let your mind, to develop the mind in a way such that you can just look at things, um, differently. So even if you're in your challenging class with challenging students, just mentally stepping back. It's like finding that uh, internal seclusion. So the Buddha talked about 3 different levels of seclusion. You've got kaya viveka, bodily seclusion; chitta viveka, which is mental seclusion; and upadi viveka, the seclusion of from the defilements. And yeah, bodily seclusion is great, but you can't always do it. So you need to be able to find this seclusion of mind, which is basically, we want to be able to find that at any point, the quiet spot in the mind, the quiet aspect of our experience. And again, it's not like not like you're retreating to some place inside your brain, but finding the the quietness that surrounds us. So I've noticed that the hindrances become stronger as chronic physical pain becomes more intense. Do you have a skillful way to overcome pain as a way to reduce the hindrances? Being kind to yourself. And I think one method is experiment with lying down meditation. Again, for people who experience chronic pain, lying down can be perfect for you. I mean, if you're in especially intense physical pain, you're not, the reason why most meditation teachers don't teach a lot of lying down meditation is because most people are not in a severe pain all the time and are at risk of falling asleep. And if you're lying down, usually what you do when you're lying down is fall asleep. But if you're in pain, you're less likely to do that. So experiment with the lying down posture. And things to experiment with there is, once you choose a posture, it's not so important whether you're on your back or on your side. But when you've chosen a posture, try to stay in that posture. And then just let everything sink into the ground. Let all of your musculature just fully sink into the ground. And then when you let your body fully relax like that, then the mind can fully relax, or the mind can at least relax to some extent. And then when the mind's relaxed, then you can actually have a different relationship with the pain. And so, yeah, I'd recommend experimenting with lying down meditation. Thank you for asking. Yeah, I hope you're able to find skillful means. So before the holiday season, practice was very great. All I had to do was to be happy. To be happy was to sit still. But since I felt a lot of coarse hindrances come up, do you have any tips for periods like this? Yeah, this is similar to the question asked earlier by Karina. Just, yeah, when situations aren't ideal, either externally or internally. Um, yeah, I think what I was mentioning before is just believing that there is, um, in the Maha or Chula Sunyata Sutta, I think it's Majjhima Nikaya number 121, the Buddha talks about the perception of wilderness or the perception of emptiness. And he says, even if, like, externally, you see a lot of people, you can have this perception of wilderness. Uh, and internally, you can have this perception of empty space. And there is a part of the mind which is not affected like that. The mind is vast. Yeah, so there are aspects of the mind, and this is one skillful means the Buddha taught to dealing with restlessness is, finding that part of the mind, those aspects of the mind which are not touched by that restlessness and remorse. So there are parts, believe that, and look for them, and don't get stressed if you can't find them. Um, and if you can't, and it's making you more stressed, then just watch that. That's vipassana. That's clear seeing, and it's changing. So, gosh, great questions, everyone. One last question, and after this, we'll probably go over to our Zoom meeting. Let me put the link to that. Um, yeah. So here's a link to our Zoom conversation. There we go. And we'll be moving over to Zoom, where we have a conversation for about, and it's back and forth interactive for about half an hour. Ajahn, could you please share the name of the books that you mentioned about antidotes to anger? Yeah, I mean, there's one by P.A. Payutto, which is, I think, called Dealing with Anger. He's a Thai monk. And I think it's translated into English. But if it's not, there's a very similar book by Thubten Chodron called something like Dealing with Anger. And that's great. They're both really great. And I think, yeah, Thubten Chodron's Tibetan tradition, but it doesn't matter. Anger is anger. And she mentions and has a lot of great ideas for dealing with anger. So I hope that's helpful. And so great to see everybody. And yeah, maybe see you in the Zoom meeting. Okay. And if not, then maybe see you all in future Wednesday evenings. I think Tanisable will lead next Wednesdays, and he'll be again online and maybe in person as well for this Saturday at St. Mark's. So take care, everybody.